Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Keith Burke, a professor of behavioral sciences in the Alcohol and Other Drug Studies program at San Diego City College. The AODS program is a comprehensive vocational job training program for people who wish to sit for the state certification exam to be a certified alcohol and drug counselor in the state of California. Today, I am going to talk about writing treatment goals, and specifically writing treatment goals when working with families in substance use treatment. This video on family counseling treatment plans and treatment goals is a follow-up to previous videos that have been released on doing family counseling in substance use treatment facilities, and specifically after having done an assessment with a family where you've identified factors that contribute to the family member substance use, how the substance use is affecting the rest of the family. You've identified some major issues that the family may want to work on in treatment together. So what we're going to do now is shift over into designing those treatment goals and building out a treatment plan. So the purpose of treatment plans is to create goals that are going to identify problems that are going to be addressed in treatment. This is true for individual treatment plans. This is also true for family treatment plans. The treatment plans provide structure to the process. Essentially, it's like a map of where the treatment is going to go next. When writing treatment goals, the goals will identify not only the specific problem, but the interventions that are going to be used in order to address that specific problem or concern. If one of the problems that have been identified in a family system is that nobody in the family listens to each other, they're constantly interrupting each other and talking over each other, then a treatment goal may be that the family will learn to use and practice talking with a talking stick, so that whoever is holding the talking stick has the floor, so to speak, and if somebody wants to respond to that, they have to ask for the talking stick. So in this case, the treatment goal may say, something to the effect that the family has identified a concern with interrupting each other, talking over each other, not listening to each other. And so the family will practice learning how to use the talking stick in the family counseling session when they meet next week. And then subsequently, there may be treatment goals written that the family will have a family meeting on Saturdays to review how the week went, and they will use a talking stick for the hour that they have the family meeting. So it's just an example off the top of my head. The idea is that treatment goals are going to make it very clear, here's the problem, and here's what we're going to do to work on this problem while we're in treatment together. And the goal actually establishes a way to measure progress. I mean, essentially, did you accomplish that treatment goal or did you not accomplish that treatment goal? In the AODS program at San Diego City College, we go into treatment goals and treatment planning in much more detail in our case management class. But suffice it to say that the basic idea is that we will create goals that identify the interventions that are going to work on specific problems or concerns while the individual or the family is in treatment. And we're going to use that to measure progress. Are we actually accomplishing anything in treatment together? And note that treatment goals are required by, it says many insurance billing agencies, pretty much all funders. So whether that is a state-driven insurance company like California Drug Medi-Cal, or a private insurance company like Blue Cross Blue Shield, or really even a grant. Pretty much if people are paying for somebody to receive services, they typically want to see a treatment plan with treatment goals that identify what will be worked on during treatment. In this lecture, I am not going to go over treatment plan templates. There is no universal treatment plan template. Most agencies are going to have some kind of a standard treatment plan form. Most agencies at this point have moved to electronic records keeping. So whatever software the agency is using, there will be some kind of a treatment plan format that's built into that. There are paper versions of treatment plans that are probably still out there. Lots of different variations on this. They can be very structured with lots of checkboxes and fields to fill in, or they may be relatively unstructured, essentially a blank piece of paper that identifies what's the issue, what's the goal, when is it going to be accomplished. So whatever treatment plan template is being used, all the treatment plans that are out there will have identified issues on the treatment plan, the goals and objectives that are going to be used to address those issues, and the agreed upon interventions. Treatment plans will always also have a time frame, particularly if there's any kind of a funder, they're going to want to know how long it's going to take to accomplish this treatment goal. And treatment plans are statist, meaning individual treatment goals will be looked at typically every time that you meet with a client or a family to see, did we accomplish that goal that we set last time? Also very important, all treatment plans need to be collaboratively created with the clients, meaning that it's a discussion between you and the clients, and signed by both. The client needs to sign the treatment plan and the counselor needs to sign the treatment plan. In the state of California, any licensed or certified treatment agency must have treatment plans that have been signed by both clients and counselors. This indicates that there's an agreement upon the main issues that will be worked on in treatment and how they are going to do that. Again, also required by pretty much every funder out there. All right, let's talk about developing client-driven family treatment goals. So in order to develop a treatment plan with individual treatment goals in that plan, first we need to determine what the priority issues are. Now, a treatment plan is going to come about after there's been some kind of an assessment where we've had a chance to talk to the family, figure out what's going on with them, identify the major points of concerns. So when we get to the point of writing treatment goals for the treatment plan, the first thing that we want to do is summarize the high priority issues that you and the family identified during the assessment. Most of the time, there's going to be numerous things that have been identified during the assessment that a family could potentially work on while in treatment. As discussed in some of the other lectures on family counseling that are available, most agencies aren't going to have the opportunity to have many family counseling sessions. In some cases, there may only be one family counseling session. Some agencies only bring the family in when talking about discharge planning and relapse prevention planning, which is another lecture that's out there. So what we want to do is make sure that we figure out what are the high priority issues. If we've identified 14 different things that we could potentially work on, which ones are the most important? If we could only accomplish one goal, which goal would be the one that is most important? So the way that you want to do this first is simply ask the family, what do they see as most important, or what do they want to address first? At the end of the day, you are providing a service anytime that you're doing counseling, and whatever you may think is the top priority for this family, if the family doesn't see it the same way, then they're not going to work on whatever goals you come up with for them. So it's considered best practice instead when developing treatment goals, particularly when working with families, is to ask them which of the issues do they want to address first. Now, in a family system, you have multiple individuals, so you also need to test for consensus. Does most of the family agree on these priority issues? I worked with a family once where I asked what the most important issue was, and the mother piped up and said, I need people to pick up, around the house. This is crazy. The clothes are everywhere. Nobody's putting their clothes in the hamper. I do a lot around this house. Nobody appreciates me. I think they need to work on picking things up around the house. Now, this is a family who's in treatment for a substance use disorder. So I had asked the family, okay, so Mom, it sounds like you think the most important thing is to work on picking up the clothes around the house and putting them in the hamper. Got it. How do the rest of you see this? Is this the most important issue? And in this case, the answer was, no, Mom, that's not the most important issue. God, I put my clothes in my hamper, just this morning. So the consensus was that this wasn't the most important issue. So in which case you need to go back and figure out what most of the family wants to work on first. You're not always going to get necessarily unanimous agreement, but you do want to have some kind of a consensus where most agree on the main issues they want to work on. Then once these priority issues have been identified from the assessment, treatment goals need to be created in order to effectively address these specific concerns. Treatment goals always consist of actions, a specific action that the client will do to change behavior and improve relational dynamics. A treatment goal isn't, I will become more aware or I will think about something. So whatever the problem is, we need to identify an action that can be taken in order to try and address that problem. We'll talk about more how to identify those actions here in just a second, as long as we've all got the understanding that treatment goals consist of specific actions. And those goals need to be attainable and realistic for the period of time that they're in treatment. Typically, when writing treatment goals, you would want to write a series of smaller goals rather than writing one big giant goal. So if there's a big goal that the family wants to accomplish, what we want to do is break that into smaller steps, things that might be accomplished between now and the end of the session, or now and the next session, the next time that we meet, or in the next week. The idea here too is that you can increase momentum by accomplishing small goals, whereas if you set one big goal without identifying all of the relevant steps, it can often feel overwhelming, too large, potentially frustrating and demotivating. The most current evidence-based and outcome-driven recommendation for treatment goals is that they are client-driven, not counselor or agency-driven. There is an enormous amount of research out there now, mostly through motivational interviewing research, that show when clients are given goals and told they're supposed to accomplish them because they're important to the counselor or to the agency or to somebody else other than the client, they typically don't do them. They have low motivation to do it. They're not committed to doing it. So instead, what we want to do is solicit from the client, or in the case of the family, clients, plural, to find out what they want to work on so that it comes from them. Now, there are some aspects of substance use treatment goals that are programmatic and mostly non-negotiable. For example, if somebody is in a substance use treatment program, 99% of the time, they're going to be required to attend some kind of group counseling. So there will often be something on the treatment plan, or often, always should be something on the treatment plan, outlining the number of groups that the client is going to be attending and when. So if the goal is, client will attend, 2 substance use treatment groups on Tuesday and Wednesday, in the afternoon between 4 and 5:30, then that will be listed as a treatment goal. So some of these things are programmatic, and again, mostly non-negotiable. But most of the goals that are on a treatment plan should come from the client's perspective, and they should address whatever the client's individual concerns and issues are. Again, students in the AODS program get a lot more on this when they take the case management course in the program on how to work with clients, individual clients, to identify specific goals for substance treatment. So very important, we do not create treatment goals by giving advice, making suggestions, telling clients what they should do, writing their goals for them, or sharing your own experience to justify what you think is going to work best. This is typically what happens when clinicians don't have good training. A lot of people get into the helping fields thinking that I'm great at giving advice, so I'm going to help people. That doesn't work. There is reams of evidence showing, again, when clients are told what to do, or what you should do, and have you ever tried this, and I want you to do this before next week, they're not motivated to do that, and the outcomes are typically very poor. We are not the experts in our clients' lives, and nor do we know what works best for the clients without asking. Now, students in the AODS program get a lot of training on motivational interviewing, which is considered the go-to best practice for treating substance use disorders, and solution-focused counseling principles, which is also considered to be a best practice when treating substance use disorders. In both of these orientations towards counseling, the counselor is expected to solicit, ask, invite, evoke goals and plans from the clients first, before making suggestions. In other words, if we have a client who, let's say that we have a family and they are interrupting each other a lot and they're not listening to each other. And if I break in and say, all right, you know what, you guys, it seems like there's a real problem with you not listening to each other. You know what you should do? You should use a talking stick. whenever you guys are having a discussion, you should use a talking stick, and here's my pen, here's an example of this, let's practice. Most of the time, people are going to look at that suggestion with some form of resistance. At least that's what the evidence says. They may be confused by this advice. They may be resistant to this advice. They may justify what's happening. They may tell you it's a cultural factor. This is just the way that our family talks and it's fine. We're all okay with it. So the goal here is not to tell them what to do and how to do it, but instead to ask them. So a better approach to this might be something like, I'm noticing, family, that you all tend to get very energetic and excited. And sometimes it looks like you're interrupting each other, and I see some frustration. I'm wondering, is this an issue that the family has that you might want to work on? Oh, yes. No, that's true. We don't listen to each other. It's very frustrating. Okay, great. Well, let's talk about that. Do you have any thoughts about something that you could put into practice, that might work? And so what we start doing first is trying to evoke goals and plans from them. Now, there are many ways that you can do this. These are some examples, not a full set of questions, but just some selected examples of how motivational interviewing and solution-focused counseling techniques use questions to identify client-driven goals. What are some ideas that you have that might help to make this better? What have you tried already in the past in order to improve this? And did that work for you, or did that not work for you? What's worked for you in the past when you had a similar issue? What can you do that you haven't done yet? I'm wondering if there's something out there that you've thought about doing that you haven't tried yet. Do you know anyone who's had a similar problem? How did they improve the situation? And you're going to want to make sure that you're getting everybody's thoughts on this. Again, mom might have a very strong idea about how to handle this, but we want to make sure that we check in with everybody else. Like, okay, got it, mom. So, you think what might help is having everybody put their clothes in the hamper. So, all right, how do the rest of you feel about that? What are your thoughts? What do you think might be the best thing that we can do? So the idea of evoking or soliciting treatment goals typically means you're going to start out by asking questions. Now, if clients say they don't know what to do, that's usually not true. Sometimes that happens where you ask a client, wow, this is a problem. What do you think you could do in order to improve this? I have no idea. I don't know what to do. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm talking to you. Don't believe that. Most of the time when clients say they have no idea what to do, they do actually have some ideas. They just either aren't comfortable bringing those things forward, or they're thinking that's what your job is to solve the problems for them. So what you want to do before you start making suggestions is continue to try and evoke ideas from them by brainstorming. So here's some examples of ways to do that. All right, so it sounds like you're not sure what to do. Well, let's come up with some ideas together that might be helpful, and let's weigh the pros and cons. Have you talked with anybody else about this situation? What did they think you should do? Well, let's pretend another family was in this situation. What advice would you give them to solve it? So what we're doing is we're using targeted questions to generate a brainstorm, to get people thinking for themselves. One of the things that I talk a lot about when I'm teaching in the AODS program is that even if we were able to solve a client's problem, which we typically cannot, but even if we were able to do that, we didn't actually help them. This is a lot like that biblical parable of you can give a person a fish and feed them for a day, or you can teach a person to fish and you will feed them for a lifetime. We need our clients to learn how to solve their own problems, come up with their own goals, and implement those goals, because we're not going to be with them for the rest of their lives. It's not like 5 years later, they've got some problem, the family's got some problem, and we're going to burst out of the closet saying, hey, I know what you should do. You should use a talking stick, right? That's not going to happen. So when we're asking them to brainstorm and we're trying to evoke ideas from them, we're actually training them or coaching them on how to solve their own problems, which is the overall goal of any kind of counseling setting. Now, if you do have some thoughts, you can bring those forward after the clients have attempted to generate their own ideas. So once you've started to get a list and they've come up with some ideas, now you might say, yeah, these are great ideas. You know, something else that sometimes has worked for some of my clients is using a talking stick. Now, I'm bringing that in as a participatory member of a brainstorm. I'm not bringing that in as the expert that's telling them what to do. And the key thing here too is that in a brainstorm, me bringing forward an idea, the client has full right to reject that idea if they don't feel like that's going to be a good fit for them. So the summary of how we develop treatment goals is to solicit ideas from the clients first. Ask them, what do you think you could do? What have you tried before? What's worked? What might somebody else have done, you know, who's in a similar situation? If they say, I have no idea what to do, you say, okay, great. Let's just brainstorm then for a second. Let's just come up with lots of ideas. Maybe we've never thought of before, but how might other families in this situation deal with this? And so we develop a bunch of brainstorming ideas. And then after we've generated some kind of a brainstorm, and if the clients are unable to come up with any ideas, which is really unlikely, then we can bring forward some of our own thoughts as ideas to consider. Now, once the clients have come up with issues and goals that they're committed to work upon, now it may be appropriate for you to ask about some other issues that they might want to consider for treatment goals based on your assessment. Meaning that during the assessment, there might have been something that you identified as a big deal or an important issue. But when you ask the family, what would you like to work on first? What's most important for you? They don't bring that up. So we're going to go with whatever they bring up first because that's going to encourage and motivate them. So yeah, great. Let's start with that. Right? You think the most important thing is that the family's interrupting each other. All right, let's talk about how we can come up with some goals in order to treat that. Once we've come up with those goals, now we may want to bring forward some other things that seemed important to us, but we're going to bring it forward as a consideration. We're not going to tell them that they have to work on this. So there's an example phrase here at the bottom of this slide. Okay, this is great. There was another issue we talked about earlier. Most of you in the family don't have a lot of education about addiction. Is this something that you'd like to address in the treatment plan? Now, I'm bringing it forward as a consideration. If they're like, yeah, no, I don't think that's really important. I don't want to do homework. I'm too busy with a lot of things. Okay, great, right? We're going to go with whatever they want to do first. But they may say, yeah, actually, that's true. No, we don't know. Yeah, we probably should work on that. And then we're going to go back to the same exact thing that we talked about in the previous slide. Okay, awesome. So let's just come up with some ideas. How do you think that you might be able to learn something about addiction? Okay, let's brainstorm with some other things. What do you think other families do when they're trying to learn about addiction? Great, yeah, so we've come up with a whole list of ideas. Something that some other clients that I've worked with have benefited from are Al-Anon meetings, which are meetings in the community for family members, you know, who have somebody in the family who's suffering from alcoholism or other forms of addiction. So get the ideas from the clients first, brainstorm with them. If they can't come up with anything or if they've exhausted the brainstorm, then we can bring forward some additional ideas. There are some common additional substance use treatment goals for families that typically the families don't bring up themselves. Education about substance use treatment is really important. Every single treatment program that I'm aware of in San Diego County, where I'm located, uses education and psychoeducation for individual clients who are in substance use treatment so they can learn more about addiction and the process of recovery and how drugs affect the brain and all kinds of really important pieces of information. But it's equally important for families to have education about substance use treatment. Now, I've seen a lot of families in my work in various substance use treatment agencies, and I have never had a family when I've asked them what's most important say, you know what? We need education about substance use treatment. That's very important. Our family doesn't have it, right? They just don't do that. It's not something that they would necessarily think of. So this is one of those additional treatment goals that I often bring forward after they've come up with some of their own goals as another thing that they could consider for treatment. Similarly, developing a support system. Most families who are coming to a substance use treatment facility because one or more of their family members are in treatment for a substance use disorder, typically don't have very good support systems. Most of the time, the family members have been shutting off from potential support systems. They're not talking about what's going on in the home because they're concerned about it, or they're worried about it, or they're ashamed by it, or they're stigmatized by it. So most of the time, they've become very isolated with a big problem that they're not talking to anybody else about. So developing a support system is a really important aspect of treatment for families. And there's lots of ways to do that. Al-Anon, which I mentioned earlier, other types of professional or peer support groups, talking to extended family members who have also gone through either substance use treatment or the process of recovery. There's lots of ways to develop a support system. And many times there may be supplemental referrals that need to be made. We talk about this in the assessment lecture, but typically when you're assessing a family system, you may uncover other issues that are important in this family system outside of treating the substance use disorder that you will want to make a referral so that you can help the family system with. Okay. So once we know how we want to try and address this, we need to then write our treatment goals. So the format of treatment goals need to be written in a way that it's something that the client or the family can do. Meaning that you can't have a treatment goal of, I want my wife's supervisor to be nicer to her. It's great, that's a great wish, but my wife's supervisor presumably isn't sitting in my family counseling session with me. That's not something that I have control over. So the treatment plan has to be an action that the clients who are in treatment can actually take. The action must be specific. So in the AODS program at San Diego City College, some of the other classes talk a lot about SMART goals. So I'm going to talk about 3 of the aspects of SMART goals. SMART is an acronym, S-M-A-R-T. I had to check for a second, make sure I spelled that right. So the S stands for specific. So an action must be something specific that the client and the counselor can both picture. In other words, if the client says like, okay, you know, like, we've been really stressed out about everything that's been happening at home. Okay, well, what can we do about that? Well, I want to be happy. Great wish, right? But what action is associated with being happy? So typically when you're trying to make an action specific, it's going to answer the question, what does that look like? So if somebody says, I'm really stressed out. I appreciate that my wife is in treatment, but one of the things is, I think I just need to get exercising again. Okay, great, right? So exercise, there's many, many different ways exercise could be done. So it sounds like you, Dad, in this case, one way that you can support this process is take care of yourself through exercise. What does that look like? Like, what do you actually do for exercise? Oh, well, I'm a runner. Like that's pretty much how I exercise. Ah, okay, great. So you want to start running again in order to deal with your stress while your wife's in treatment. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now we have a specific action. The measurable part of an action always identifies how many or times or how often you're doing whatever that action is. So in this example, if Dad's decided that he needs to start running again to deal with his stress, presumably he's not going to be running 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So part of writing a treatment goal is to figure that out. Like, okay, so sounds like you want to start running. How often do you want to commit to doing that? Well, I think I'd like to run every day. Okay, is that realistic? I mean, what if something comes up and, it's Sunday and you go to church and you don't have the opportunity to run? Are you sure you want to do 7 days a week? No, you're right. I think I want to make a commitment to 5 days a week. I'm going to run. Okay, so we're going to help them get to the measurable part, and then time bound means we're binding it with a start time and a deadline. Typically, most of the time when you're writing treatment goals in substance use treatment, the start time will be between now and whenever we set a deadline for it. But sometimes it'll be, starting on Monday, I'll do something like that. So, okay, great. So starting on Monday, Dad's going to commit to running for 45 minutes. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and if able to, we'll also do it on Saturday and Sunday. So that goal is specific, it's measurable, and it's time bound. So the other acronyms in a SMART goal, so A stands for attainable or achievable, meaning it's actually a goal that can be accomplished. And the R stands for relevant. So the goal is relevant to treatment or what it is that we're trying to do here. So similarly, an example that maybe the whole family can use, I'll just stick with the talking stick because I've been talking about that as an example throughout. So maybe the family is like, yeah, okay, like, you know, we need to practice not interrupting each other and listening better. Okay, great. Well, what does that look like? Like, what's an action that you as a family could do in order to practice listening better and not interrupting each other? Well, I mean, you mentioned the talking stick before that some families have used. I mean, that sounds like a fairly good idea. Like, we can maybe try that. Or, well, how do the rest of you feel? Like, yeah, I guess so. We can do that. Okay. So you want to practice using the talking stick in order to practice not interrupting and listening to each other better. So now you've got the specific action. Okay. So how often are you going to use the talking stick? Presumably, you're not going to use the talking stick every single minute that you're all at home. So when are we going to use this talking stick? How often and where? Well, maybe we could do it when we're having meals together. Like, yeah, that's a great idea. So when you're not eating, you don't need to use a talking stick. But while you're all eating together, since that's dinner table is one of the places where a lot of arguments have happened, you all will practice using the talking stick. So whoever's got the stick, right, they're the ones that can talk. And if somebody's got a response, they ask for the stick. Okay, great. So you're going to do that during meal times. Are we going to do this every single meal time, like breakfast, lunch, dinner? Well, no, maybe just at dinner time. Got it. So the action is the family's going to practice using a talking stick in order to practice not interrupting and listening better during dinner time, all 7 nights of the week. And this is going to start tonight after the therapy session is over, and you're going to practice that for the next 7 days until we meet together next week. So it's specific, it's measurable, and it's time-bound. Students in the AODS program will get a lot more practice on writing treatment goals that are specific, measurable, and time-bound. All right, there's a couple of other strategies for writing goals that we'll go over today. So one of the most important aspects of writing treatment goals is to create them so that they're manageable. Treatment goals should be written in a way that they're easily attainable in a short period of time. So the general rule of thumb in clinical work is that treatment goals should be something that can be accomplished in the next week or within the next 4 weeks. I am definitely a proponent of treatment goals should be something that could be accomplished as quickly as possible. Between now and the next time we meet is ideal, because the next time we meet, we can always update the treatment goal and add to it if necessary, but it gives us a good benchmark. So treatment goals should be short, attainable, something that you can accomplish in a short period of time. The bigger goals are fine, but they need to be turned into manageable goals within the limits, of whatever the treatment time period is. What I mean by that is if a person is in treatment for 60 days and the family is working with you for that 60-day period, then we don't want to write treatment goals that are going to take 6 months in order to accomplish, because that'll go beyond the treatment time period. So again, we want to make the goals small. So one way to make goals small is to chunk them down. Typically, what happens when people have big goals, they often freeze or don't know how to proceed. So like for an individual, I'm going to go back to school is a goal that a lot of the students in the AODS program at San Diego City College had. But I want to go back to school means a whole lot of things. So to chunk down a goal of I want to go back to school may entail first I'm gonna do some online research to identify schools that are out there that are affordable. I'm gonna identify whether they have classes in the program that I want. I need to find out how to apply. I need to send in an application, right? There's many different chunks, if you will, or smaller goals in the bigger goal of getting back to school. So with a family, similarly, if there's a huge goal, the family's going to listen better. Okay, well, that's an ideal goal, but we need to break that down into specific, measurable, time-bound actions that can be done in a short period of time. So using the talking stick between now and the next session, practicing during dinner, and then reviewing with the counselor how that worked is a good way to chunk down the goal. So there are many ways to chunk down goals, but essentially you work with the clients to figure out, well, okay, what's one step, or what's the first step in the right direction? What's something small you can do between now and the next session in order to make progress towards this goal? And the idea is that we're going to try and build momentum to accomplish these goals quickly. Planning backwards is a variation of chunking, but instead of starting today, what are some small steps you can take going forward? Usually planning backwards is used when clients are having trouble coming up with what the first step is or what the next step is. Typically when I'm doing this in the classroom, I'll use a whiteboard and I'll ask for a volunteer who's got a big goal. And what you do is you write the goal on the side of the blackboard. And then planning backwards is figuring out what is the goal we're looking for, and then we're going to create a timeline back to today. And then we do is say, okay, I want you to imagine you've accomplished this goal. So let's go backwards in time. Right before you accomplish that goal, what happened? And right before you accomplish that, what happened? And before you accomplish that, what happened? And what you do is you write that all on the board, and it creates benchmarks for what the steps are in order to reach a goal. And then what you can do is you can come up with specific goals related to what those small steps are. So chunking and planning backwards are two sides of the same thing, one going forward in time, one looking into the future, and then planning backwards. All right, there's another important aspect of treatment goals that's called ecology check. So the concept of ecology check actually came out of business schools, and it's part of business planning. And the idea of an ecology check is before you launch a treatment plan, or in the case of businesses, a business plan, you want to do an ecology check. You want to check and make sure that everything is going to work. So I'm going to tell you a story about this. This is the Australian cane toad. So the story of the Australian cane toad is a true story. You can look it up on the internet, go to the Wikipedia page about it. What happened was in Australia, I'm trying to remember when this was. I think this was the late 1800s into the early 1900s. Sugarcane exploded throughout the continent of Australia. So Australia is a big giant island. It's isolated. They imported a bunch of sugarcane, seeds or roots. They started growing sugarcane. It was a very important product for the country, a big part of their gross domestic product. But what happened was they had a beetle that started eating all the sugarcane. And so this was a big problem, right? The government was like, oh my God, sugar makes a lot of money for our country. This beetle's eating all of our sugarcane. Like, what are we going to do? And so what they did was they came up with a plan. They did all the right steps. They said, okay, well, let's brainstorm. Let's come up with some ideas. What about other countries who have sugarcane? What do they do about these beetles? And somebody figured out like, oh, well, other countries have these toads that eat the beetles. They're called cane toads. And a bunch of people are like, oh, okay, well, that sounds like a great idea. Could we get some of those toads and could we bring them in and make sure that our sugar is protected? And so they're all like, yeah, okay, well, that's a good plan. And so they came up with a plan and they went out and they researched, who had these cane toads. The University of Hawaii actually had a breeding program for the cane toads. They were studying them there. So the country of Australia bought a whole bunch of these cane toads. They brought them to Australia and they released them at different points on the coastlines and basically said, okay, toads, go do your business, go eat the beetles. So here's the problem. So they introduced the cane toads to eat these beetles, but these toads are poisonous. In Central and South America, where the cane toads originate, they have lots of predators, and so they've developed poisons in their skin and in the little nodules on their back in order to protect themselves from predators. But in Australia, there were no natural predators. So in Central and South America, predators had evolved so that they either weren't affected by the poison or they figured out a way to eat the cane beetle or kill the cane beetle without being poisoned. But in Australia, there were no natural predators for these cane beetle or for these toads. And it turns out they're prolific breeders, kind of like bunnies. They breed multiple times a year, multiple little toads in the litter, and they spread really rapidly. So if you go online and you look this up, you'll see they were tracking the cane toads, and it's like every 10 years they were spreading, and they spread throughout the country really, really fast. So it turns out these cane toads, which are pretty huge, go back to the picture here, you can see it's bigger than a human hand. They eat everything. So they don't just, eat beetles, they eat all kinds of plants, they eat rodents, they eat reptiles, they eat other frogs, they eat birds, bird eggs, insects, they eat garbage. There's videos of the cane beetles in Sydney and Perth and some of the big cities in Australia, like basically living in the alleys, eating the trash. Since they're poisonous, they cause death to animals that come into contact with them. So when dogs and cats attack the Australian cane toad, it usually doesn't turn out very well for the dog or the cat. And there actually were human fatalities recorded. Some of the Aboriginal tribes in the deep bush in the middle of Australia, cane toads came hopping in. They're like, oh, we haven't seen these before. What are they? Let's eat them. And there have been human fatalities from eating the toads or eating their eggs. And here's the kicker. They generally don't eat the cane beetles. So an ecology check is before you launch a plan, you want to go through, are there any downsides to this plan that we can think of? So if the country of Australia, after they came up with a plan of we're going to import all these cane toads, had actually sat down and thought like, okay, are there any downsides to this plan? Like, what would be the disaster? What if this doesn't work, right? What's going to happen? And if they had done an ecology check, somebody might have said like, well, they're poisonous. They have natural predators there. They don't have any natural predators here, right? Then it'd be a chance to say like, wait, hold on. We got to figure that out. What if they spread like crazy, right? But they didn't do that. And so the ecology check is you've developed a treatment plan that has treatment goals on it. Before you launch, you need to do a double check. Is there any downside to this plan? What stopped us from doing this plan previously? Who else is going to be affected by this plan? What's the impact on the rest of the family? Like, for example, maybe the family comes up with this great idea that they're all going to go to Al-Anon meetings together, but they have babies at home and they don't have childcare, right? So that would be an example of, oh, well, we need to figure that out before we can launch this plan to go to the Al-Anon meetings. So after doing an ecology check, which is before we launch, just make sure that there isn't something we haven't thought of, the answer to the question of are we still on track will dictate whether or not that goal is the right goal to launch at this time, or whether there's other goals that need to be accomplished before that. All right, so now we have covered developing treatment goals, writing treatment goals, and the ecology check. So once you've gone through that, then it would be time for the clients to launch their goals. Okay, so that today, our lecture on treatment goals, and specifically treatment goals for families. When working with families, many of these principles apply to doing individuals as well. Hope you found that informative. Until next time.